The studio that day was not like any other. Usually, film sets are filled with chatter, the hum of lights, and the occasional laugh from crew members trying to ease tension. But on this day, silence filled the room. Lights were dimmed, cameras waited, and the stillness itself seemed to carry weight. Keanu Reeves sat down early, as he always does, but something about him felt different. In his lap rested a Bible. Its cover was aged, worn at the corners, as though it had been carried through many storms. His hand lay gently on it, not like someone holding a prop, but like someone holding a lifeline. Across the room, Jonathan Roumie, the actor known for playing Jesus in The Chosen, walked in. His eyes widened when he noticed the Bible. He greeted Keanu respectfully, but curiosity lingered in his expression. Something unusual was about to happen, and both men knew it without saying a word. A voice from behind the cameras broke the silence. 30 seconds. But those 30 seconds stretched long, almost sacred, as though time itself slowed to make space for what was coming. As the red light on the camera switched on, everyone expected a typical answers, perhaps a story about a new film, but instead, Keanu leaned forward slightly, his hand still resting on the Bible. "I've never spoken about this publicly," he began, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. "Not to my closest friends, not even to my family." The air in the studio shifted. Even the crew, who were trained to stay quiet, leaned in. Jonathan Roumie tilted his head, sensing something deeply personal was about to unfold. Keanu continued, 3 months ago, after finishing a film in Europe, something happened to me. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't imagination. It was real, so real that I can't explain it with logic or reason. That night, I believe I had an encounter with Jesus Christ. Jonathan's eyes widened, not with skepticism, but with a kind of reverence. He didn't rush to respond. Instead, he let the words breathe. The stillness in the studio was no longer just silence, it was a kind of holy hush, as though everyone present understood they were witnessing something beyond an interview. Keanu lowered his eyes for a moment, then placed the Bible on the table between them. "This belonged to my grandfather. I had it for years, never opened it. But after that night, I couldn't ignore it anymore." Keanu drew in a slow breath. "I was in Berlin, staying alone after we wrapped filming. The movie was dark, full of grief, anger, and revenge. I've played those roles before. But this time, the weight stayed with me, even after the cameras stopped rolling." He paused, his voice softening. "That night, I woke up around 3 in the morning. No sound, no dream, just this feeling, as if I wasn't alone. The air felt different, heavy, but peaceful. And then I saw light." Jonathan leaned closer. "Light from where?" "I don't know," Keanu admitted. "It wasn't the lamp. It wasn't from outside. It wasn't like any light I've ever seen. It wasn't physical, it was presence. It was awareness. And in that moment, I felt something I'd never felt before in my life. I felt completely known." The room was so still that even the cameras seemed to fade into the background. Keanu's voice shook slightly, not from fear, but from memory. It was as if every wall I had built around my heart, every wound I had carried for decades, was seen. My grief, my guilt, my anger, all of it. And yet he wasn't judged. I wasn't condemned. I was held. He stopped, his eyes glistening. And then, a message came, not spoken aloud, but clear in my soul. "Your suffering is not without meaning." A few in the audience wiped their eyes. Jonathan whispered, "And you believed it?" Keanu nodded slowly. "In that moment, yes, completely." Keanu reached for the Bible on the table. His fingers brushed across its rough, aged cover. "The morning after that night in Berlin," he said softly, "I finally opened this. It had sat on my shelf for years, untouched. But that day, I couldn't resist. I just needed to know if what I felt was real, if it had meaning." He opened to a page that seemed to fall open on its own. His voice grew quieter, but stronger. "The first words I read were these: 'I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live.'" The words hung in the air like a bell echoing in a cathedral. Jonathan inhaled slowly, his eyes widening with recognition. "For years," Keanu continued, "I've played characters haunted by death, men seeking revenge, men broken by loss. And yet, when I read that verse, it didn't feel like poetry. It didn't feel like literature. It felt like truth, like an answer to the question I've carried in silence for decades. Is death really the end?" A tear slipped down the cheek of a young woman sitting in the back row. She wasn't alone. The words had touched more than just the actors on stage. Jonathan whispered, "That must have changed everything." Keanu nodded. It did. I started reading every night, not as a scholar, not to prove anything, but as someone desperate to see if this presence I felt was real beyond just one night. Keanu's voice softened again, but his words were clear and steady. I've lived much of my life with grief, losing my daughter before she took her first breath, losing Jennifer, losing my brother, River, even the silence left by my father. I carried it all, but I carried it alone. He paused, staring at his hands. I thought strength meant building walls, acting like the pain didn't touch me. But reading the Gospels, I saw something I had never noticed before. Jesus didn't avoid pain. He didn't dismiss it. He stepped into it. He wept. Jonathan nodded knowingly. The shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. Yes, Keanu said, his voice catching slightly. And that moment hit me harder than any miracle, because it told me this. God doesn't just watch pain from a distance. He enters it. He feels it with us. He stands beside us in it. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like grief was something to hide. I felt like it was something God could hold with me. A silence fell again, not heavy, but tender. A few in the audience dabbed at their eyes. Others bowed their heads. I realized, Keanu continued, that maybe my suffering wasn't meaningless after all. Maybe the losses I've carried could become doors to deeper compassion, doors to presence, doors to healing. That was the beginning of change for me. Jonathan sat quietly, his hands folded. Then, with gentle curiosity, he asked, "You've spoken about grief, Keanu, but what about forgiveness?" Keanu exhaled slowly, almost as if releasing something heavy. "That one has been harder," he admitted, "especially when it comes to my father. For years, I carried the wound of his absence. I told myself I had moved on, but deep down, I still wore it like armor. Abandonment, silence, anger. I thought that pain defined me." He paused, eyes lowered. Then he lifted the Bible again and opened to a marked passage. "One night I read these words, 'Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do.'" Jonathan's eyes softened, "Even from the cross." "Exactly," Keanu said, his voice breaking slightly. Even in his final breath, Jesus wasn't clinging to pain. He was letting it go, releasing it, and that pierced me in a place I didn't know was still raw. He took another breath, steadying himself. "Since then, I've started praying each night, not for success, not for blessings, for forgiveness, for the people I've hurt, and for the people who've hurt me, including my father. It isn't easy, but I do it because I've learned something. Forgiveness isn't about being noble, it's about being free." The audience sat in silence, the truth of those words sinking in. A man in the front row nodded slowly, as if laying down a burden he had carried for decades. Keanu leaned back, his voice softening again. "I've started visiting children's hospitals, quietly. No cameras, no announcements. I go as a man who knows what it's like to lose. Parents open up because they know I understand. And I don't come with answers or speeches. I just sit with them," Jonathan whispered. "The ministry of presence." "Yes," Keanu said. "That's it. Just being there. Entering the suffering instead of avoiding it. And sometimes, if they ask, I share what's helped me survive my own grief. Not a sermon, just this simple truth. I found something in Jesus I never found anywhere else. Not peace instead of pain, but peace inside the pain." For a long moment, the studio was still. Some wept silently. Others sat with hands clasped, as if praying without words. Jonathan looked at Keanu, his own voice catching. "Do you realize how many people have never heard that suffering doesn't have to be wasted?" Keanu met his gaze. "That's why I'm here, because I can't keep it to myself anymore. If even one person hears this and finds hope, then it's worth sharing." The words lingered in the room like medicine for tired souls. It wasn't just a conversation now. It was a testimony of healing, raw, unpolished, but real. Keanu leaned forward, his eyes steady, his tone calm, yet full of conviction. "For years, I gave the same answer when people asked, 'What happens after we die?' I'd say energy transforms, consciousness continues." It sounded deep, but when grief came close, it felt hollow. He paused, looking at Jonathan. "Last year, while filming in Morocco, a man approached me between takes. He had just lost his son. He recognized me and asked a question I will never forget. 'Mr. Reeves, what happens after we die? Will I see my son again?' Keanu's voice faltered for a moment. I had nothing that could meet that man's pain. He looked back down at the Bible and spoke slowly. "But now I remember the words Jesus said to Martha at her brother's grave. 'I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, Though he die, yet shall he live. That's not a metaphor, it's a promise. The audience grew still, as though the air itself was listening. If that's true, Keanu said firmly, then River's story isn't over. My daughter's story isn't over. Jennifer's story isn't over. Death doesn't get the last word. Jesus does, and his answer is life. Jonathan swallowed hard, his voice quiet. That changes everything. Yes, Keanu nodded. It changes how I see my past, how I face my future, even the roles I choose. I've realized this. Revenge may look powerful, but it doesn't heal. Redemption does, and that's the story I want to tell from now on. The studio was silent again, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was hopeful, almost healing. Keanu sat with his hands lightly clasped, his voice soft but unwavering. I've spent my whole life asking 3 questions, he said. Does love survive death? Can suffering have meaning? And is there something greater holding it all together? For years, every answer I found slipped away when the pain got real. But in Jesus, I found something different. Not just ideas, a presence, a relationship, someone who enters the grief, transforms it, and promises it's not the end. Jonathan nodded slowly, visibly moved. You're saying this not as an actor, not as a character, but as yourself. Keanu smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes after tears. Yes, not as Neo, not as John Wick, just as Keanu, a man who has suffered, but who has also been held. He let the words breathe, then added quietly, I'm not perfect, I still struggle, but I know this. Suffering doesn't have to be meaningless. In Christ, it can be transformed. The crew didn't clap. They didn't need to. What filled the room was deeper than applause. It was reverence. Dear friend, if you are listening today, perhaps you too carry grief. Perhaps you wonder if your pain has purpose. Let this story remind you, you are not alone. Suffering is not the end of the story. With faith, even the darkest chapters can be turned into light. And if this touched your heart, we invite you to share your own story below. Because sometimes, healing begins not with answers, but with the courage to speak truth and to listen with compassion.